It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. The Prime Minister arrives in Washington for a crucial meeting with President Trump.
Partnership, because our history shows that when we work together, great things happen.
The President met with his cabinet last night, but will he agree to what the Prime Minister wants on Ukraine? Also today, is online porn damaging society?
This is about getting rid of harmful, abusive pornography that so many young people, children have been able to watch. Hopefully that will get better with age verification.
And an NHS trust advertises for a corridor doctor. Is this the new normal? Joining us today, the Labour MP Fred Thomas, Conservative MP and Shadow Environment Minister Neil Hudson, former independent parliamentary candidate and economist Faiza Shaheen, and shortly by talk presenter Alex Phillips. Politics Live. Hello and welcome to the programme. Well, let us start with the big story of the day. Keir Starmer is in Washington for his long-awaited meeting with Donald Trump. Let us have a look at how some of the front pages this morning have been reporting this. It's all over the papers. The Times, we can see, we need you to hold back Putin, PM tells Trump. The Guardian also goes with Starmer to press President Trump on security guarantees in critical Ukraine talks. The Mail focuses on discussions about the Chagos deal, and the Daily Telegraph also says Starmer to confront President Trump on Ukraine. Now, clearly going to be a very, very important set of talks. So my question for my panel first, what does success look like? Fred.
Well, look, these are really important negotiations that are going on later on today. I think success looks like a continued really close relationship with the United States, which I'm absolutely sure we'll get. We know that President Trump is a fan of our Prime Minister. He said that previously. We want to see that continue, and I'm sure we will, particularly in terms of Ukraine. We're looking for America to agree to provide a security backstop. What that means is that if there's a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, the Americans would agree that were Putin to do some kind of further aggression after this ceasefire is potentially agreed, that American military response would come in just to assure that peace. And that's what we need, and that would be appropriate.
Neil, what's a good outcome for Keir Starmer in these set of talks?
Well, this is perhaps the most important bilateral meeting between a British Prime Minister and an American President for decades. And I raised this in the chamber yesterday at Prime Minister's question and asked Keir Starmer about this. And actually the House and the country is willing the Prime Minister to succeed with these important discussions. And I asked him as well about invoking the legacy of Churchill and the whole transatlantic relationship, that it's so important. I was really pleased with the answer that the Prime Minister gave, that actually success for this will be actually America really recognising the importance of the United Kingdom in that special relationship to be that transatlantic bridge with our European allies, so that actually, as Fred has said, with the situation, the existential situation that we're facing with Ukraine, that the UK can be at the heart of that, America can be strongly supporting that. And actually, I was really pleased that the Prime Minister really reaffirmed the commitment to Ukraine, but also the commitment to NATO. And actually, the increase in defence spending is very welcome. And, we wish the Prime Minister well. The whole country does, and the whole House does.
Faiza, success would be recognising the UK as a bridge between the US and Europe. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, no doubt it is tricky for Keir Starmer. But one thing I would say in terms of success, and success not just for Starmer but for this country, is also not necessarily always playing into the Trump lines. And he is a tricky character. But at the same time, I think many of us are concerned that we are playing into Trump, adopting similar policies on things like cutting aid, on things like the way we're treating refugees and blocking them from getting British citizenship, on a very muted response to the outrageous idea of Gaza being turned into a Riviera, which is ethnic cleansing. And I worry that we'll walk away from this and some idea of success will be like, oh, Trump still likes us, but at what cost? At what cost for us in this country? And it may be okay for him to do those things if he was a Conservative or Reform, but he's not. Right. He's Labour.
Well, Fred, should Keir Starmer be challenging President Trump, and would that be a successful outcome?
I think we just need to clarify a couple of things, as far as was said there. The UK and the Labour government have absolutely not signed up to anything apart from a two-state solution in the Middle East, and we want Palestinians to be able to go home, to their rightful home, to be able to rebuild there and live there in peace. We want total peace there. So to say that we've signed up to something which we haven't,
I said it's a muted
would be
response.
Somewhat
it was muted.
Inaccurate, if I may say. And the other thing I'd just like to clarify is this: what you said there, that we're not letting refugees seek asylum in the UK. We absolutely are. The UK's got a really proud, long history of offering refuge to people in the UK. My own grandmother was a refugee in the UK.
Well, then you should be upset about the fact that they're saying that those that have come through dangerous routes, they will block from allowing to have British citizenship. They're refugees. You know, if you look at the records, the majority of them are given refugee status, so you should be upset about that too.
I mean, I think the point is that there are major points of difference between the UK and the US. Should Keir Starmer be going in there to emphasise, for example, as he has done, that Russia was the aggressor in the Ukraine war?
It's absolutely clear that the UK and the US are very close partners. I would challenge any suggestion that we have different worldviews. We've got a very long history of working extremely closely together on the international stage and in our own countries. We have £1.3 trillion of trade between each other. And they're just a hugely important relationship. Our worldview is incredibly similar, and we need to work very closely with them. And I'm confident, actually, that we'll continue to do that. We've been doing that. I know there's been a lot of talk, and the newspapers have got some big headlines, but the reality is Ukraine is still standing today because of UK-US very early intervention. No one else came with us at that time. That was us. We led the world, and we're ready to do that as well.
OK, Neil, very briefly.
I think it's so important to reaffirm that Russia was the aggressor in this. And as I asked the Prime Minister yesterday about the support for President Zelensky as the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, as Churchill in the Second World War delayed elections because of an existential threat to his country, so did Zelensky. And I think that's important, and the Prime Minister has been very clear on that. OK,
I just want to mention that our fourth panellist, Alex Phillips, has very unfortunately had some trouble getting into the building here in Westminster, but very pleased to say that she is joining us down the line. So welcome to you, Alex. We are obviously discussing the main story of the day, Keir Starmer's visit to Washington. Let's just have a listen to a clip from President Trump now on this idea of a security guarantee for any ceasefire in Ukraine. Keir Starmer has repeated his desire for what he calls a US backstop to maintain Ukraine's security after any ceasefire. Let's have a listen to what President Trump said, though, when he was asked about it.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well. And as you know, we'll be making we'll be really partnering with Ukraine in terms of rare earth. We very much need rare earth. They have great rare earth.
Alex, I mean, this is one of Keir Starmer's key demands. There's a massive gulf over this already.
Yeah, but is there really? Because actually, if America is taking 50% of various assets, such as rare earth minerals, which are going to be in the part of Ukraine that is not Russian occupied at present, then that's American interests essentially in Ukraine itself. So if Russia tried to set a foot in there and take that territory, they are essentially going up against America. And I think actually it is important that the UK, alongside the rest of Europe, takes defence very seriously. We've totally failed in this. I was listening earlier with interest about saying if it wasn't for the US and the UK's early intervention, Ukraine would be destroyed. I think that's true. But this actually goes to show how weak and feeble and divided Europe has been. And I think the key message from this, from both the president and the deputy president over the vice president over in America, is get your act together. This is your continent. And in many respects, many countries in Europe have enabled Putin by continuing to buy Russian gas over the course of years, thinking they can sit at tables with him and negotiate with him. Well, it hasn't worked out. So I think that Trump has put Europe, and along with Europe, the UK, in a very difficult position. But actually, it's forcing countries in Europe to start taking action that should have been taken a long time ago.
Fred, a wake-up call then for Europe?
I think there is some truth in what Alex says. It has been a wake-up call for Europe. That is undeniable. European security is very much cohesive. And we've actually seen through the invasion of Ukraine quite how close European countries are able to work together. Unfortunately, since the Cold War, there has been a slide away from that. We've seen defence budgets slashed across Europe, not least in our own country, where the Conservatives cut it by 20% in the first 5 years of their government coming in 2010, which is a disgrace. And we're now taking steps to come back on that. But I have to say, some of what Alex says is true. It has been a wake-up call, and I'm really glad that the UK, our government, our Prime Minister, with cross-party support, has stepped forward and on Tuesday in the House announced increased defence spending going forward. That is leading by example. What we will now see from our government over the coming months is leading through creating consensus and asking other NATO European countries to commit the same amounts of spending. That's really important because security is not done by any one country. No matter what you hear, it is about cohesive and it's about consensus.
OK, I mean, Alex, do you want to come back on that? I mean, Keir Starmer is going armed with this increase in defence spending. Is that going to be enough, do you think?
No, it's not going to be enough. I think most people in the military are saying it won't even touch the sides. There was speculation as well that some, if not all of that increased spending would end up being relocated to pay for the Chagos Islands in that abysmal deal, which I hope Donald Trump has the sense to block. Fingers crossed that is something else that manifests from this meeting. But, you know, Europe hasn't been cohesive about this at all. They dithered for 6 months at the start of the invasion of Ukraine, not wanting to apply sanctions. Germany, to this day, don't want particular German weapons being used in Ukraine. And so this idea that Europe somehow can get together and sort itself out defensively is for the birds. That's been proven to be totally wrong. I do think Keir Starmer's done the right thing. I question whether he would be increasing defence spending were it Kamala Harris, let's say, in the White House and not Trump, putting the UK in a difficult position, potentially threatening us with tariffs as well. If Donald Trump wasn't strong-arming him, would he have made this announcement? I doubt he would have done, but I'm pleased to see it's happened.
All right, Alex, well, let's talk about that idea of what Europe has or hasn't done. I can bring in now Jürgen Hart, who's the spokesman for foreign policy for the Christian Democrats in the German Parliament. They won the recent German elections. Jürgen, very good to have you on the programme. Let's pick up on that point first that Alex makes, that this is going to be a wake-up call for Europe, and actually Europe hasn't been cohesive in their actions in recent years.
I think he's right. We did too few in the last 3.5 years in German government, which was led by Olaf Scholz, the Social Democrat. And we always ask for doing more for the support for Ukraine. Earlier, as it was delivered from Germany and more than it was delivered from Germany. Now we are on a higher level from German support, military support, equipment for Ukraine. But unfortunately, it would have been better to have it in 23 with the chance for Ukraine to come in the forehand in that war against Russia to defeat its own territory. And we missed that point. And now the new German majority, I think, will agree on to increase defense expenditures significantly and immediately. I think it will be in line with other European NATO partners. I have heard about the British plan, the new proposed British plan. I also had discussions in December last year with some members of the government in UK about what to do. And I'm sure that Friedrich Merz, the hopefully and probably new chancellor in Germany from Easter on, will have close contact with the British and the French government. I think Friedrich Merz already had a telephone conversation with the Prime Minister of UK. Yesterday he visited French President Macron in Paris for a long personal talk. And I think bringing Europe together and bringing European NATO partners together, how to increase the deterrence on conventional attack from a potential attack from Russia. It's the key point of German foreign security policy in the next year.
Well, can we just talk about President Trump's attitude to the EU? I just want to play you, Jürgen, a clip of what President Trump said at his cabinet meeting yesterday.
I love all countries, frankly, all different, but European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
Is that right?
This is totally wrong. He has no view on that what happened in Europe in the last decades. European Union is a huge chance and also a big advantage for US because we have a common trade regime. To import from US into European Union is very easy because of the single market structures. We have low tariffs on both sides. We are both
right, but he's threatening 25% tariffs on you.
Yeah, he wants to give tariffs 25% on automobiles and other parts. I think parts of automobile industry, but he didn't understand it and he didn't know that most of the cars exported from US to the world are not from Ford and not from General Motors, but from BMW in South Carolina and from Mercedes and from Volkswagen. And therefore, the US labor market and the US tax income is very much driven also from German automobile industries. And we have to explain that again and again. It was a misunderstanding in the first term of Donald Trump, and it is continuous as it is. But I'm sure that on the Hill, a lot of members of Congress from both parties know about the strengths of German economy and European economy in US and the good trade relations between US and Europe. And if he wants to make US greater, which is a plan of Donald Trump, he should not increase tariffs because those tariffs have to be paid by US citizens and US companies and not by us.
I mean, Keir Starmer is in Washington today. He's obviously going there with a message of trying to emphasise the common ground the UK and the US has. He's talked about President Trump, for example, creating an opportunity in peace talks on the war in Ukraine, that he was right, for example, to bring President Putin to the table. Do you see Keir Starmer as playing a helpful role when Friedrich Merz has talked very clearly about trying to achieve independence from the US?
Independence is probably not the right word because our leverage to fight for freedom and free trade and against autocrats and dictators in the world, the leverage is much bigger if we cooperate between North America and Europe as it was in the past and should be in the future. And most of the politicians in the US know that. Maybe in White House there are some irritations on that. I think that we can trust on Keir Starmer that he is not only promoting UK role to US, but also the European view on peace and security and trade. And having in mind that probably Donald Trump will present some gifts, some offers to UK to bring them on the side of White House and not on the side and make a distance between London and Brussels. I think the British government will not jump into that trap because the trade and political relations between UK and Europe are much stronger and much more important for UK than to Europe. But hopefully we can reach a situation where we all together increase our values for peace and for prosperity.
OK, Jürgen, thank you. Stay with us for a bit. I just want to come back to my guests here in the studio. Pfizer, I mean, what do you make of that point? Keir Starmer rejects the choice between Europe on one hand and the US on the other hand as a false one. Is he right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an in-between role for Starmer here, and you know, it's tricky. It's interesting to hear that you know, Trump might try and pull him over to that side. I think, though, listening to this whole conversation is that we have to get a bit real about this. Trump likes Putin, like. Who knows why? And people have different ideas about that, and we can say he's wrong. But he's very clear that he's in it for economic transactions. He wants to take what he can from Ukraine. He wants to be at the negotiating table with Russia. He doesn't want to do a backstop. He's very clear about that. And even if, say, he hints at something different tomorrow, next week he could change his mind. So, you know, the strategy here, really have to think about it. And, you know, I'm concerned with all the talk of defense spending. I understand it on the practical level, but I'm worried that we have more of a war strategy than a peace strategy. Now, we might not like the way that Ukraine is being sold out. We might not like the idea of sitting down at a table with Putin. But the truth is that these things only ever end with negotiation. So what is the plan here in terms of ending this? And remember, and this is, I guess, partly Trump's point as well, is that there were huge increases in all kinds of prices, including energy, when Russia invaded Ukraine. And actually ending this has all kinds of economic benefits. Now, Labour is really focused on GDP. This could help them. And so we need to be thinking much more about what the peace strategy is rather than being ready for war.
OK. I mean, what is the peace strategy, Neil?
Well, I think you're right. This has brought into sharp focus the importance of things like energy security and food security, and it has been a wake-up call. I think the focus of these talks has to be on that transatlantic relationship and focusing on NATO. Putin thought with this whole illegal invasion that he would destabilise NATO, and actually it's had the reverse effect. It has been a wake-up call. We've had Finland and Sweden accede to NATO, so NATO has become stronger. I think this is what the UK Prime Minister can do, is reaffirm the importance of NATO, and I think that will resonate with Trump, because I think that, as I hark back to Churchill, Roosevelt, that side of things, that transatlantic relationship, and I think that has to be the focus, because this is existential. Peace in Europe is actually existential for us as a country and for global democracy.
Yeah, look, these are incredibly threatening times. I would just make the point here that defence spending isn't just money gone. It's an investment. And our number one mission as Labour government is growth. Without that growth, we're not going to be able to lift people out of poverty. We're not going to be able to keep continuing to pay for increased NHS care. Defence can lead to growth. We're talking about making, manufacturing items in the UK. That's jobs, thousands, potentially tens of thousands of new, highly skilled, secure, unionised British jobs. That's a fantastic opportunity. I think too often in this debate, increased defence spend is considered a kind of money gone. It's not. That is a fantastic investment in a public service and in security. And by the way, if you want growth,
Fred,
you need to have security. That's the number one thing you need to have growth. And that's what we ran on, in fact, in our election.
Respectfully, Fred, I would have to say, though, that the Labour government's policies on the economy and on business are actually stifling growth. And actually, in terms of trying to improve employment, improve sectors, then the government needs to review some of their business policies.
I mean, I kind of agree with that, but also that the kind of growth you have is really important. Like, what your argument you're making is that more weapons will address poverty. Like, is that the kind of country we want to be really increasing our defence industry? Given
Alex,
that, you know, what do you think that sector does? What do you think the weapons do in the world?
Can I bring in Alex here?
Yeah, no, I mean, we absolutely do need to increase defence. It's brilliant for the economy. We were once upon a time one of the world leaders when it came to defence. It gives you hard power on the international stage when you sell your weapons to other countries. It gives you a great diplomatic leadership. And that's very important because we are a sane country. We're one of the good guys. And so we need to be prepared. We need to be armed. It should stimulate a lot of jobs in the military industrial complex. And I think that is a wholly good thing. But going back to a point that someone else was making, a huge part of defence is also energy and food security. And it's absolutely right. We've got the highest energy costs in the world. So how are we going to build up weapons manufacturing when it's so expensive to make anything in this country? And when it comes to food security, at the outbreak of World War II, we were importing 40% of our food from abroad. And as a result of instability on supply lines, we ended up having to have rationing. And we had campaigns such as Dig for Victory. Well, if we're in such a geopolitically insecure moment at this present time, why on earth is Sir Keir Starmer going after farmers with inheritance tax, going after farmers wanting to build solar panels on that land as well? Right. We have no energy security and we've got no food security, and that's also part of the message coming from the White House.
Pfizer, come back.
I mean, there you have it, like essentially Reform UKIP viewpoint of agreeing with Labour, and this is the concern, I think, for many of us that wanting to be represented by the Labour Party that don't have those values, that's not being represented. And I would say absolutely on energy and food security we need to be doing much more. But unless we have a clear plan to end this war, it's very difficult in the short term to do that.
Just coming back to the point. Just coming back to the points on.
I do want to let Fred come back on that, Neil, and then we will come to you.
We may have been listening to different things from Alex there. That felt like a criticism of the Labour government, of I think what she was trying to do there. We absolutely don't align with Reform's values, but we do believe, and in fact there's cross-party support for this in the House, and we need unity on this from the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. We need national security. National security is not something to be embarrassed about.
Of course, everyone
it's
needs
not some shameful thing. It's not kind of investing in creating death or any of these nonsense headlines. Instead, it's about bringing security. Security can enable growth. It can enable opportunity. It can therefore enable us to invest in the kind of things that give people every opportunity to go on and thrive domestically. Nothing to do with warmongering. And we need cross-party collaboration.
OK, Neil, come in briefly, and I want to go back to Jürgen.
In terms of thriving domestically, food security is so important, and we're trying to get growth in the economy. What the Labour government is doing is stifling the rural economy by actually putting in this inheritance tax policy that will really jeopardise food security moving forward. Family farms will go out of business, and now of all times is
right,
the time
that is a discussion for a slightly different day. Jürgen, I do want to bring you back in for a final thought. I mean, we've heard a lot from Keir Starmer's government about a reset of relations with the EU. Do you think President Trump's White House and the dealings with President Trump on Ukraine are bringing the UK closer or further away from Europe?
I do not only hope, but I think that this will bring UK closer to European Union. I think the role of European Union in foreign security issues will be more important in the future than it was in the past. European Union was always an economic giant, political great organization, but with foreign security issues, it was a very smaller than from its political and economic weight. And with the more importance of security issues, I think this will be also a field where we cooperate close with our strongest military ally in Europe, which is UK. And I hope and hope to see that we will have a integration of UK in all the processes of European Union to increase defense expenditures, to increase the effectiveness of our procurement and production of military equipment, having maybe a set of regulation for exports of those weapons, which is homogeneous between our countries. And at the end, I hope to see a much stronger European pillar of NATO, including UK, and also driven by Commission as it is now.
Jürgen, thank you so much. Jürgen Hart there, foreign policy spokesman for the Christian Democrats. Many thanks for joining us on the programme. Now, let us have a look at this headline from today's Times newspaper. Overcrowded hospital forced to advertise for corridor doctor. This is an NHS trust in Sussex recruiting a full-time doctor in an advert to look after elderly patients being treated in A&E corridors. Fred, is this the new normal that everyone has to get used to?
Look, no one should have to be cared for in a hospital
But
corridor.
they are being.
It shouldn't be happening. And frankly, the state of the NHS that we inherited from the Conservatives is a national disgrace. I'm really proud to say that the Labour government campaigned on saving the NHS. I personally did in my patch in Plymouth as well. And we promised things. We are delivering on those promises. 2 million extra appointments a year. We said that would take us a while to deliver. We've made that in good time, 7 months earlier than we promised to do it. We've delivered on that promise. And this is now the 4th month in a row that waiting lists are in fact going down, Layla. I mean, that's massive news for everyone across this country. Everyone deserves to have free healthcare, free at the point of use. And this Labour government are delivering that in spades. I'm really proud to say that.
OK, I mean, you're talking about promises. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said very recently that he can't promise that there won't be patients treated in corridors next year. When will it stop?
Look, no one pretends that you can click your fingers and magically mend everything. What we have done in our budget last year is invest an historic amount, £26 billion into the NHS. We did have to make hard decisions to do that because we promised the country we would save the NHS like we always have to when we come back into government of the Conservatives. It's always the same way, but we are going to go ahead and do that. I'm really proud of that. We've promised things that are going to come down the line more and more. Part of the reason hospitals are under so much pressure is that care in the community has collapsed under the previous government. How are we going to fix that?
Well,
I can tell you right now, we are going to reform
let Neil respond.
the GP contract.
Let Neil respond first.
I mean, this story is deeply disappointing. I think in terms of patient care, patients being treated on trolleys in corridors is not acceptable.
It happened under your watch.
And also we have to think about the staff, doctors and nurses as well, working in those conditions. And one of the key issues with the NHS is recruitment and retention, and keeping morale up of NHS staff, who we are so lucky to have, is so important that we've got to support them.
Is that the same ones who are on strike?
Can I just make my sort of point, Fred? I didn't interrupt you. I think it's so important that we've got to make sure that people have access to healthcare. I'm really pleased that the Conservative policy on rolling out community diagnostic centres, the Labour Party has taken that baton. I put pressure on that locally, so we're getting that in my local constituency. What I'm disappointed at is that we had plans in place for new hospital builds. So an example locally is Whipps Cross Hospital, where planning had gone through, spades in the ground, car parks starting to build, and the government has paused that. If people are going to be treated on trolleys, we've got to make sure that these new hospital builds come online.
Faiza, I mean, is the government neglecting A&E? They focus a lot on waiting lists.
Well, there is a reduction in the number of targets, and we've got to look into that, because that is like moving the goalposts. But absolutely true that they inherited a terrible situation from the Conservatives. I saw with my mother being sick over 10 years how it declined from, she went in, Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, and I just saw it happen. And Whipps Cross is my local hospital. I was born there, and my dad died there. It's really upsetting because that hospital is falling apart. Absolutely, corridor, you see it, I hear people tell me about it all the time. To hear that again, that is being moved to 2032 does look bad on the Labour Party, it does. And look, this is the most important point I want to make about saving the NHS. Saving the NHS is not handing over more and more contracts to the private sector. And this is really important because right now, absolutely, people just want to be seen. But there are a couple of things that are happening. One is there's a two-track system that is being built by handing over to the private sector. They are taking the easiest cases to deal with, and that is resulting in those waiting longer that have more complicated issues. Secondly, if you keep continuing, and it looks like these contracts are getting more permanent, more longer term under West Streeting, is that we will see what we've seen in other areas of the public sector that has been privatised, which is it will end up costing more money over the longer term. So this is the real danger. It's not just lowering the waiting list, is how you do it.
Right, Alex, I mean, what is the answer, the immediate answer to get people not being treated in corridors and quickly?
Well, you're going to have to use the private sector, and you're going to have to use private hospitals as well, because they have facilities and they have capacities that the NHS simply does not have. And it's interesting that you asked me this question today, because just 2 days ago, I was visiting my uncle in hospital. He had a fall. He's broken his hip. He needed emergency surgery. He wants to get back to his home, but his home needs adaptations so he can continue his recovery there. And what I've encountered is basically a bureaucratic quagmire, no one able to talk to anybody else, delays in the system. How are we going to get the adaptive things in his house that he desperately needs? And it made me think, actually, what we could do with is a private sector dealing with stuff like that. Because once you start being able to get people out of hospital, the pressure on the system all the way through is alleviated. The reason why, when my uncle had his fall, he was sat outside in an ambulance for 4 hours before he was even admitted into the hospital. So I've seen this with my own eyes, and I'm seeing it right now. And so we do need to use the private sector. That doesn't change the fact that the NHS will remain free at the point of access. And that is what's critical here, not who's providing the services.
All right, Alex, but I'm afraid we are running short of time. I'm sure we will return to that issue of the appropriate role for the private sector in the NHS and indeed the wider state of the NHS in weeks to come. But let us turn now to another of the main stories today, because the Conservative peer Gabby Burton has published her review, which was commissioned by the previous government, of the porn industry. Now, she has recommended banning degrading, violent and misogynistic content, as well as that which could encourage child abuse. She talks about it being rife on mainstream platforms, and she says it's normalising that sort of behaviour in real life. Her aim, she says, is to tackle this gulf between what is currently prohibited offline and online. Let's have a listen to what Gabby Burton said.
I mean, pornography's been around since the dawn of time. I mean, no one's getting away from that, and that's okay. I genuinely don't have an issue with that, and I don't have an issue with what consenting adults get up to in the privacy of their own home. This isn't about this. This is about getting rid of harmful, abusive pornography that so many young people, children have been able to watch. Hopefully that will get better with age verification, but we have to accept we've had 10 years, really, of young people watching some of this stuff. And also, to be perfectly honest, whether you're 15 or 55, there is a great deal of content that just should not be allowed.
Gabby Burton there. Well, we are joined now by Madeleine Smith, who is an adult content creator. Very good to have you with us on the programme. Madeleine, sorry, I misspoke. Madeleine Thomas, I didn't mean to get your surname wrong. Just tell us a little bit about your experience, Madeleine. How has it changed over the time since you've been in the industry?
Yeah, it's changed quite a lot from sort of, I guess, the scale of it, the nature of it, and as well as the impact. It's definitely shifted dramatically. I don't think that we've changed what we're interested in looking at as consenting adults. So I think perhaps it's the technological size and shape has changed, certainly.
Do you accept that there is a sort of proliferation of harmful content, and do you accept what you heard there from Gabby Burton? It's having a wider impact across society.
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. I mean, what would you describe as harmful content, if anything?
I think that would be a personal preference. I think if we look to police people's sexual interests, that's problematic. But I do think it's really interesting and great, actually, that Baroness Gabby Burton has been looking into this, and meeting with her was really eye-opening. We had the chance to talk to her about our experiences and what we would like to come from the review. And ultimately, we have seen some of those things in the review, such as making more robust measures around intimate image abuse, a bit more robust in law. But there are problems in seeing that there is no mention really of decrim, and that's really what sex workers and pornography creators call for, is decriminalisation.
Right, but what about her recommendation of the broad ban on what she calls degrading, violent and misogynistic content? Is that something that's workable in your view?
I don't think prohibition has ever eliminated demand in any way, but I do think that there are ways that we can work together to kind of come up with frameworks that prioritise both consent and compassion, and allow people to create and view what they would like to view on the internet.
OK, Madeleine, thanks so much. Stay with us for the moment. I mean, Fred, is this the right approach that Gabby Burton is taking, trying to align the real world with the online world when it comes to what's allowed and not?
I think Madeleine makes an interesting point about demand, and I think the point here is more about availability and about criminality, and it's about legislating to make things illegal and to make them therefore much less available, particularly to young people. Currently, the situation in this country and in most countries in the world is that young people, children, can access online hardcore, often violent pornography very easily. Now, that obviously is wrong, and we're legislating to change that. And as of July, we take this from the previous government, you will need to prove that you are an adult to go on those porn sites in general. But this is not about mainstream porn. As Baroness Burton outlined earlier, this is about specifically violent activity.
Well, she says that they are actually all over, that kind of pornography is actually all over mainstream platforms.
Exactly. So this is what I'm trying to say about availability. We need to make sure that stuff is not readily available online. Madeleine makes a point about demand. Maybe the demand will always be there. That does not mean we should tolerate this stuff being online, because it does lead to a societal problem. We don't know what the effect is going to be in future decades of the current crop of youngsters being able to access this stuff so readily. And that's really dangerous and it's quite a scary thought. So I massively support the various legislation that's coming in. We've committed already to legislating after Baroness Burton's report, specifically around some of the more violent scenes in these porn films, and I support that fully. OK, I
mean, Madeleine, just come back on that point, will you, about the worrying long-term effects of young people viewing porn?
Well, I mean, I think it's best that we speak to people who are looking at the kind of legislation and academics in this space, because they will have certainly much more of an informed response than me. I simply create the content. I do not police and don't stand as a representative of all sex workers and pornography producers in the world. But if we can just look to like where these harms are happening. So, for example, you reference extreme misogynistic content, and especially there's strangulation that's mentioned quite a lot in Baroness's review. Now, as a dominatrix, I have created strangulation content myself, and that's with consenting submissives and men, and you do not see a problem of female identifying women strangling men. It just is not, it's not happening in our society. But what we do see is young adults, generally men, who are engaging in strangulation with female partners. Now, is that not a misogynistic problem rather than a porn problem.
Right, so it's a reflection of what's going on in society. Alex, can I bring you in here? What do you make of what you've heard?
Essentially, I think that there's been some interesting points made there, but I want to pick up on this idea that, things such as strangulation are normal. These things have entered into the mainstream. Porn has become essentially a public health crisis. I've been saying this for about 5 years now, if not longer. When you look at things like the rate of erectile dysfunction among men, anxiety and depression that's come out of continued porn use, it's now at 1/3 of under 40s, which is utterly ridiculous. It's never been that high historically. When you look at things like the rough sex defence being brought into courts where women have been killed in bed by partners. When you look at child-on-child sexual abuse, the average age now is 14 years old for someone who is committing sex abuse against a child. And these practices have become essentially everywhere. It's been so pernicious, and it's essentially promoting perversion. I don't think many people in society have that much interest in fetish. I think that user-generated content websites need to be brought down. It's an industry that, like other things that has an impact on public health, desperately needs to be regulated. This isn't about actually interfering in people's sex lives. This is about protecting people, because the number of women as well who are trafficked when they're leaving war zones and taken into sex works, or have been raped and filmed without consent, and those videos are then being put on user-generated content sites and are making money. It desperately needs regulation.
Alex, we're short on time, so Madeleine, do you want to come back on that? I mean, I should point out that Gabby Burton does say, as part of this, that she wants to introduce safeguards for performers and creators to guard against exploitation and coercion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a person in the porn industry, I can absolutely agree and tell you that we are working towards, keeping trafficking out of our work. And trafficking is a crime in and of itself, as is rape. And we cannot conflate pornography with those crimes. Policies must recognise the rights of adults to express themselves without undue restrictions so that personal freedoms aren't compromised.
OK, Faiza.
Yeah, it's good to see this review. I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I would just say I had a little look at the research, and absolutely it is distorting young people's ideas of sex and relationships. And I think given that it's so hard to regulate and all the issues that come with that, I think we also need to make sure that we are having conversations with young people about the dangers and what they're seeing. You cannot separate the porn industry from what's happening in society. And so, we need to have that conversation and be more upfront about it.
Neil, is porn rewiring people's attitudes to sex and relationships?
I think this is a really important piece of work by Baroness Burton. And actually, I think, as she said, it's trying to get rid of the violent, abusive, extreme pornography that, as you say, is actually influencing people and actually normalising behaviours. And we have, evidence from this review and other studies as well. Young men and young boys, this sort of behaviour is normalised for them, and that's something that is quite frightening as well. So, and actually, to pick up a point that Alex made in terms of the rough sex defence, the previous government did put in place measures through the Domestic Abuse Act to actually try and tackle that, and that needs to be taken further as well. But I think it is deeply concerning the level of usage of this that actually is influencing young men and boys to normalise this and objectifying women. So I think this is an important piece of work, and I think the government should look at it very, very closely indeed.
OK, very briefly, Fred, last word on this. Is it possible to put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak?
Let's be honest, probably not fully. That doesn't mean we shouldn't legislate very carefully. And the government are committed to looking at Baroness Burton's review in great detail. We've got various acts that are going to come through and bills coming through. And there'll be a strong reaction on this. OK, many thanks indeed. Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. Madeleine, thank you so much for joining us. Madeleine Thomas there. And we could go on talking about this for much more time, but I'm afraid we have run out of road today. Many thanks to all of my guests, Fred Thomas, Neil Hudson, Faiza Shaheen and Alex Phillips, who I'm very pleased was able to join us down the line after being unable to get into the building. That is all for today. Joe will be back on Monday with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on iPlayer. Goodbye.